It's a burning topic in the sense that as a nation, as a country, we really put a lot of emphasis on good education, and we do equate good academic result to success in life, to better financial, economic, and social status of individual. So academic poor performance is a cause of concern for most of us, most adults, most parents, teachers, and society at large. At the same time, today is what an appropriate day of talking about this topic, because tomorrow lakhs of students are going for CBSE board exams. So today lakhs of homes all across India and abroad, wherever CBSE schools are in that tensed condition, and those who are not performing well consistently are a big cause of stress for family, for themselves, for teachers, etc. So let us look at it. When we hear about somebody not doing well consistently, we do tend to have some judgment, some ideas, opinions about what the causes are. So let us look at the slides and see what are the commonly perceived causes. So generally when we hear about somebody not performing well, we have an opinion. Usually people think that probably the student is lazy, not really motivated or interested, not hardworking, distracted to various other things, for instance fun, for instance indiscipline, irregular schedules, for instance internet, social media, etc., or friends who are probably not a good company. So the students are not academically inclined. If that's what we usually guess, we commonly perceive the causes of academic poor performance. Similarly, there are poor teaching techniques, like either we blame the student for not doing efforts enough, not making enough efforts, or we talk about the school and the teachers that probably they are not putting in much effort and doing justice to their job. So these are some of the common perceived causes. However, evidence suggests, if we look ahead on the slides, there are evidence-based causes, because there's a lot of research on the topic, and these include a number of aspects, various related aspects of an individual. So when we talk about the student as an individual, whether the student is a school student or a college student, the student is basically a person who's sort of not in isolation but connected through various psychosocial, environmental, physical aspects of their individuality. So let us look at some of the common causes. They include psychological causes, the social and environmental causes, the neurological causes, which of course are related to the cognitive development, cognitive understanding of the individual, and physical or health issues. So we'll take them one by one and try to understand how it goes. So we'll start with psychological aspects. So what does psychological aspect means? It means basically thoughts, emotions, feelings, how one relates and how one thinks about oneself. So the way success in any field or in any aspect is related to how one thinks of oneself. So also when we talk about the academic result or academic success, self-concept is one of the most important things that would determine whether the individual is confident, whether the individual feels he or she is capable, whether the individual is clear about his or her priorities, whether the individual gives importance to success, gives importance to or has expectations from oneself. So what an individual thinks about oneself as a student, as a capable, intelligent person, as someone who can achieve, determines to a large extent how much efforts they would put and how steadily inclined he or she would be towards studies, towards academics. So self-concept is one factor. Another one is psychological disorders. Now what happens, if you remember one of our programs, we at length discussed stress. Stress is certainly common. Stress is to an extent positive because it sort of moves us or motivates us towards action, towards effort. But when this continues to, extraordinary sort of level, then it becomes difficult. So here we are talking not only about stress issues due to academic pressure, stress issues due to other psychosocial aspects, but also to the extent that various stressful or various biological reasons, when they lead to psychological disorders, then of course it has direct effect or impact on the academic performance of the individual. If you remember in the last program, we talked about mental health concerns, and we saw how common is issues and disorders like depression, issues and disorders like anxiety, and these problems definitely make it difficult for any individual to concentrate on creative pursuits, to concentrate on academics, to concentrate on completing their tasks, assignments, etc., which certainly has an effect on the result or performance. So the common frequent psychological disorders that are observed not only in youth, in college students, but also in school students, especially separation anxiety is the one which is very common in school students. There's examination phobia and test anxiety. There are issues of conduct, issues of behavior, issues of indiscipline, and something like conduct disorder, where there is total tendency to go out of bounds, out of control, involved into antisocial and other activities. So those behaviors, those disorders also lead to poor performance in academics, as one can easily guess. Similarly, anxiety, generalized anxiety, anger and fear, those emotional states where whether the anger is directed towards peer, anger is directed towards a school teacher, or it is directed towards family, whatever the issues are, but a person who is generally aggressive, agitated, angry, impulsive, or fearful, this complete psychosocial reasons do have direct influence on the academic performance of the individual. Similarly, another very common disorder, we'll talk in details about it later, are learning disabilities. And as we understand, when we talk about learning disability, as the name implies, it would have an effect on learning of the individual. So psychologically, the disorders, psychologically, the emotional setup, emotional mindset of the individual, all that would have a direct effect on the academics. Another set of factors, let's look at the slide. All right, so this another set of factor which is psychological in nature is the personality of the individual. So we have extrovert personality, somebody has introvert personality, then there are other types of personalities. So research has shown that conscientious people are who are highly responsible and who have set goals, who work steadily as industrious learners. These students, these people with such personality, have very good result, as it is obvious, and this sort of this personality helps in gaining high academic attainment. So if we look at students in our class, if you're a teacher or you're a student yourself, so you can see that those who steadily achieve good result are people who are more organized, are those who are more responsible, their attendance in class is good, they are regularly sort of the good listeners, they are listening to the lectures, they raise questions, they show interest, and overall all these behavior aspects affect the academic result. So these are some of the psychological aspects, and another important psychological aspect is the motivation level, because when we initially looked at the perceived causes, people usually talk and say somebody is not interested, they are not motivated enough. How to motivate them to get good result? So lack of commitment, lack of motivation to study is another important factor, and we'll be talking more about it. Time management, again, that depends on the priorities a student has, and where do they rate the academic part of their life as important, and how much time they spend, how much time they spend in distractions, all that would affect the final result. Another aspect that has been seen is the medium of instruction. So places, the schools, the colleges, the universities, where students who are not from English medium schools and they have to study the content in this medium often find challenges. So basically it's not that there is a lack of motivation, but because the medium is not very comfortable for those who do not know English well or who have not studied this medium, then academics and result becomes a challenge. Another is the problem with subject content and examination. As we initially mentioned, examination anxiety is one cause, and then the content. If there is difficulty in understanding or finding the content interesting, finding it boring, then also it would have effect on the result of the student. So what happens, as I mentioned, we'll talk about motivation. So what happens? What are the factors that intervene with students' motivation? Let us look at the slide. So there is fear of making mistakes. So failure due to resulting humiliation. It has been seen, and there are some researches also, and also my personal experience as a psychotherapist, both in school and college students, that at times the student would not like to initiate an assignment or ask questions in class or even attend some of the teachers' class, or students in school avoid going to school because they know how they are being treated. So at times somebody who performs poor, even if they know their result is not good, they want that to be secretly given to them. However, some of the teachers and sometimes some students, the peer group, teachers feel that probably by announcing it in front of everyone, they'll sort of get motivated. However, it never happens the same way with each child. So some of the students get very upset and find it humiliating, and that can sort of push them away from studies instead of motivating them towards studies. So because there is, and of course we also know that there is a lot of parental pressure to perform, to get good result. So fear of getting bad result, and then the repercussions that a student has to face at home, instead of motivating them out of fear, at times it also demotivates, and they say that we have nothing to do with it. So this fear of making mistakes can be one cause of lack of motivation in student. Another one is lack of challenge. So some of the students who, for instance, somebody is gifted, okay, and the content which is being taught in class is comparatively easy for the student to understand, or because they were gifted, they had already read about those topics, they've already understood those topics. So when the teacher is repeating those exercises in class for the benefit of the larger group, it becomes quite boring for the gifted children. So sometimes it's the topic which makes it boring, sometimes it's a subject that makes it boring for the student, other times it is the simplicity of the task which makes it boring. So any of these factors can cause the student feel unmotivated, demotivated, and not interested in really paying attention as required to the studies, to the academic task. So continuing with that, there is, as we look at the slide, there is lack of meaning. So there is no connection with one's own life. Sorry. So suppose there is a topic that is taught in class, but it is very, very different from what the child thinks about or what the student is interested in, involved in, engaged in. It might lack meaning for them. Similarly, let's take an example of a special needs child, somebody with dysgraphia. Now, when I work with younger children, I've seen that a dysgraphic child or a dyslexic child, when they have challenges in a task as simple, the beginning task of writing legibly, of clearly learning to write, of writing between the lines, of making the letters, the alphabets in proper shape and proper curves, often that becomes a big challenge for somebody with special needs problem, somebody with learning difficulties. So what happens is that because they've been repeatedly failing in it, they do not understand that a letter, a word which looks absolutely okay and right to them does not look okay and right to the teacher or the parent. So it becomes at times very meaningless for them. So that leads to lack of motivation due to repeated failures. At the same time, we earlier mentioned the emotional problems. So anger against anyone, fear of anything, as we discussed, fear of humiliation, fear of getting labeled as a poor student, fear of being made fun, fear of bullying. All those aspects, all those reasons can have an effect on the academic performance. Then there's attention seeking behavior. What happens often that, especially in urban areas where both the parents are working, often children do not get enough time with parents, and if they're doing their work steadily, regularly, then parents find it even more unnecessary to sit with them, because as busy people, the parents are themselves, preoccupied with things to do even when they reach home after work. So, though not consciously, but what happens that even due to academic poor performance, children begin to get more attention from the parents. Some children who need attention, which is basically human need, and it is a powerful motivator for children. So subconsciously they begin to lag behind. Subconsciously they begin to delay their task completion. Subconsciously they neglect their studies, because whether positive or negative, but when the parent realizes they've not done their work, the parent sits with them and gives attention and gets the work completed. So at times the attention seeking behavior also leads to delay or dislike or neglect of the academic task. So that works as a motivator to perform poorly. And of course, amongst the psychological disorders, SLD is yet another most important disorder, and we'll talk about it a little more in another slide. So let's look at the next list. So next important cause of academic failure are the social and environmental reasons. So if we look at the society of any of us, and if we focus on the students, say a school student gets up in the morning at home, spends time in school, then after school probably plays around with the neighboring friends. So basically the source of interaction or the social group of a student includes family, the neighborhood, and the school environment. Similarly, if we talk about youth in university and colleges, again it's home, again it's neighborhood, and here the neighborhood may be either not the entire locality but the friends, the peer circle, and if you're staying in hostel or a PG or a room, so again the people you're living with, and of course the environment at the institution, the academic institution. So we'll study each of these factors one by one and see how our life, actually academics is one part of the complete whole, and when we just label it that it's students' lack of effort, we miss out that there are other things that are causing this behavior. Academic result is not just one's laziness, but it's much more. If there are other important things happening in our life, it becomes difficult to focus on the task. So let us look at the first social factor, the family. So familial factors can be something as significant as a broken home. So if you look at the slide, a broken home can be because of a divorce, it can be because of a separation or death of one of the parent, or illegitimate relationship of one of the parent. So it can be any of the reasons that sort of disturbs the harmony, disturbs the balance. So not always, of course, because there are some divorces and some separations which are in a way healthier, so I'm not talking about that, but in general, if anything is a little imbalanced, which is actually upsetting for the child in a broken home, then of course it has an effect on the academic performance. Then lack of parental academic involvement. It has been researched extensively, and even if we look around and see the students, how their parents, those who have been doing academically well, how their parents sort of treated them, how their parents were interested in the task. You would hear stories like, some people say that, like, my parents never bothered what I'm doing, or some parents would tell you that we never bothered what our children are doing, they were always doing well. But if you look closer, you'll realize in the beginning years, they were pretty steady, pretty systematic, pretty scheduled and disciplined with the child's routine, with the child's homework, with the child's academic requirements, and once the habit was set up, then it became easy and they could easily sort of take a back seat. So one way or the other, parental involvement certainly has a positive effect, and of course it depends on how are the parents involved, whether they are indulgent, whether they are themselves stressed out, that's a different thing. But a balanced involvement of parent in the academic routine of the student certainly helps in academic result. Then lower maternal education, because largely it's the mother who spends more time with the child. So if the mother is educated, it for sure has a positive effect on the academic understanding of the child. And of course the family background. So family background, we'll touch upon more factors. Then it has been shown, there's a research that I've quoted in 2011 where it shows that a strong effect of parental academic involvement in those students who were living in disadvantaged localities. So even there, if the parents are involved in disadvantaged localities, in spite of their disadvantages, there's a positive effect of parental involvement. So that's an important familial factor. Then authoritative parenting. There's a research to show that it is a significant predictor of self-efficacy and resilience. Please look at the slide, and positively correlates with academic achievement. So a justification available is by acting as influential role model. So an authoritative parent would be regular, would be probably clear about their expectations, and would also add a shield against deprivation. So by mitigating risk factors, right? So if the risk factors are taken care of and the parent is involved, then there are chances that the academic result would be positive, be better, because all the disadvantages that a child can get into, all the risk factors that a child can get into, for instance, say a disadvantaged neighborhood, for instance, any company of friends who are not academically inclined, all that can be covered up if the parents are a little authoritative and positively involved. So this is yet another factor. Next one, of course, is poverty, and probably it's not very difficult to imagine that a situation, that a condition, even in our country, when we look at public schools, by public I mean the government schools, which are largely located in the slum areas or lower socioeconomic group areas, we see that it is a challenge for students to complete their assignments, to understand in class, and there's research to show that children living below the poverty threshold are many times as likely as non-poor to experience learning difficulties, cognitive and developmental delays. So even that's a possibility. So besides that, in family, the abuse, physical, verbal, sexual, all these abuses have strong trauma. It has strong psycho-emotional effect, so which certainly makes it difficult for anyone at any age to focus on academics. Now, if there's addiction or alcoholism at home, one can imagine the disharmony at home, one can imagine the environment at home, the impulsive reactions and the emergencies that can occur because of the behavior of an addict or alcoholic. So focusing on something as regular as academics can be a challenge. Then if there's an incurable disease, somebody in the family with a life-threatening disease, or somebody who's handicapped because of a disease, again most of the adults' attention would be on the patient. Thereby neglect of child is inevitable, and that will have an effect on the academic performance. Then neighborhood, as we can imagine, so lack of role models in the low academic progress areas would result in the influence. Of course, there are exceptions. Of course, there are people, and every now and then we read new stories in the newspaper that somebody in a disadvantaged condition scored so well, they've cracked good competitive exams. Yes, there are exceptions, but at large, it is hard and challenging in a neighborhood where there are not many sort of role models to perform well. Teaching workforce and learning resources available in such areas are also poor, and that has an effect again on the academic development. Then high risk behaviors such as drug abuse, such as stealing, any antisocial activity, and fighting and gang wars, etc., are very common in the deprived localities. So that also has an effect on inability to concentrate on academics and real life goals. Another important social factor is the school factor. So what is the teacher's attitude towards the students, teacher's behavior, their instructional style? Those methods have direct effect on the understanding of the content and on learning capacity, learning ability, and learning enhancement of the students. In addition to teacher behavior, the other important aspect is the student's perception. So if the perception is colored for one reason or the other, that the student is probably always focusing on me or labeling me or just picking on me, those perceptions can cause disharmony, disturbance, and that would ultimately affect the result of the student. So teachers' attitudes, student perception of teachers' attitude and their behavior, their sensitivity, that predicts the academic performance and discipline. And other school factors can be teachers' expectation and of course fear of humiliation, as we discussed earlier. If you look at the slide, there's a research in 2013, so positive teacher expectations and support and motivation, just we talked about the other side. So there is clear-cut result to show that if the teacher has positive expectation, if the teacher is supportive, then it motivates the student, and definitely it helps in good result. So it has a progressive effect even with the students regardless of their risk status, and even in lower economic students. So teacher expectation, teacher factors have immense influence, and that is why most schools and even colleges are going for teacher training, which is essential for student learning. So other factors can be the stimulating and conducive environment. If it is not available, then of course it is hard for the student to focus and progress and understand. Besides these social factors are the neurocognitive factors. So think of the child who's a slow learner, a child who has below average intelligence. Now, in spite of the best teaching, there will be challenges in understanding the content, in grasping the content. So below average intelligence is one reason. SLD, as I mentioned earlier, for instance, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, all these various learning disorders, they certainly have a very strong effect, because the student learns in a different way. There are different sort of cues and signs that are required. But a disorder which it affects the child's ability to interpret what they see and hear. So there's some different style of functioning of audiovisual cues and how they manage and how they interpret that information. Therefore, the special needs children do require specialized help. And now the government, especially in Delhi, has made it mandatory for all schools to have special educators, because there's a high incidence of learning disability. Somehow we still have a lot of lack of awareness, due to which we continue to label the child as disinterested, lazy, not paying attention, whereas the causes often are learning difficulties. So there are neurocognitive factors, and then ADHD is another very important and very common reason for not being able to perform well, because a child with ADHD or an adult with ADHD will not be able to sustain attention for a longer period of time, and there are problems of impulsivity. So anything, they just act before thinking, they're highly impulsive, and there is hyperactivity, can't sit straight or can't control the body movements. So all these things, all these signs and symptoms interrupt the concentration, interrupt the learning, and that's why ADHD is another common reason which results in poor academic performance. So learning difficulties, as you read in the slide, are more common than we think, and please remember, it is not the same as mental retardation. So retardation is absolutely, intellectual challenge, intellectual deficiency is a very different thing, and learning difficulties, of course, is a different set of disorder where the intellectual functioning is pretty average. However, there are difficulties in understanding the audio and visual cues and understanding the concepts the way they are presented usually in school situation. So these difficulties can affect a child to a large extent, and depending on their severity, and it is always necessary to put into practice a sustainable strategy. So how to do it, we'll talk about it later. Unfortunately, majority of the schools even today, in spite of the sad fact that most of the teachers are qualified, they've done bachelor's in education, but even B.Ed syllabus in most universities probably do not have details of possibility of learning difficulties. So many teachers and schools are not even aware. They just label the child as problem child without understanding that it can be ADHD, which is making it difficult for the child to sit still, or it can be a learning difficulty which is making the child unable to perform or understand or respond in the class as expected by the teacher. So detecting, identifying and treating and placing interventions would be the right way to help the child perform better. Besides that, there can be, of course, very obviously seen physiological and health factors, whether it is impairment in hearing or vision, or health conditions like allergies, asthma, anemia. All that has an effect on the concentration, on ability to sit, ability to grasp a task, etc. So then nowadays, childhood diabetes, childhood depression, that's getting common. So even in school, children with these problems find it very complex to concentrate and continue to perform well. Then physiological and other health factors can be motor impairments or orthopedic concerns, which make it difficult for the child or the adult to move around, to interact with others, and to explore the environment. And environment can be, as important as a library, which probably, if it's not, disabled friendly, one cannot access it. Then there can be neurological and physiological based learning problems, so which interfere with their learning. So, is prevention possible? If these are the causes that lead to academic poor result, can we do something about it? Well, as we've just seen, the psychological factors can be taken care of by proper parenting. The environment at home can be managed by the parents if they are adequately involved. The environment in school can certainly be managed if the school has the right vision of being child friendly, child centered. And similarly, the universities, if they have, which I always reiterate, each college, each university must have a counseling center along with the health center, which the students can go, reach out, identify what is bothering them, and get right help, because that's the need of the hour, because that's something every student, every individual deserves. So how's prevention possible? First, I would think that is the important part is to identify, and identification is possible only when there is a child-centered approach, there is presence of a counselor in school, there is presence of a counselor or psychologist in the college, in the university. So they can help along with the teachers and along with the family in identifying the causes and the understanding the nature of the challenges in academic. And the earlier it is done, the better, because early intervention certainly has a long-lasting effect. So the school counselor, the teachers, the parents, together they can team up to really understand and identify the problem. And once that is identified, one can have an individualized intervention. So whatever is required, whether the teacher needs to be guided how to help the child in class through modifications in the teaching instructional style, or modification in the syllabus content, or the parents are suggested the interventions or slight changes in schedule in helping the child at home. So that can be done. So any of these aspects is possible only when we really focus on the individual's problems, issues, concerns. So whether they are family, whether they are stress is coming from bullies in school, whether it is coming from the other peer pressure, or it is coming from parental pressure, their own expectations. So all this identification, these variety of things can be identified, and through correct parent support, teacher support, and the institution support, improvement, better result, all that is possible. That reminds me of Albert Einstein's very famous statement that everyone is a genius. So when we talk about students who are poor performers, probably we have not given individual attention or understood their basic concerns, the reasons for their result, because had we done that, we could have realized and recognized the genius, not necessarily academic, but one or the other genius in that individual, the aptitude, the ability, and if we look at the concept of multiple intelligence, so whichever intelligence is great in that individual, if we can identify, and a lot of time experience has shown that even if you identify a quality, a talent in a child or a student, in a youth or a child, which is different from academic, and you continue to harness it, continue to appreciate it, the overall self-concept of the individual develops, and that begins to show an effect and improvement also in the academic result. So what Albert Einstein said is that everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. So all those students who are listening to this program and for one reason or the other they're not able to perform well academically, I would like you to even read this statement and understand, if you've grown up enough, if you are in university and college, and you can understand that any of the reasons we have just talked about, if you can identify that in you, if there are teachers looking at this program, listening to us, I would suggest that you try to understand what Albert Einstein could very clearly see, that our role as an academic institution, as a teacher, as a professor, is to develop, motivate, appreciate, and harness the quality in the individual. And if it is academic, since we are academician, we need to find out where the problem lies and help as much as is feasible for us. And if you are a student listening, try to identify. If you can't do it yourself, take help of the counselor in your university or college. Go and discuss and find out what are your strengths and what is it that's lacking, what is it that's hampering or interrupting with your academic success. And if you can find it, that's the day your result would begin to show a difference. Thank you.